10-4, 10-4. Perfect. Well, again, thank you for the nice introductions. My name is Michael Cagle, and as mentioned, I work in PID, which is Policy Innovation and Dissemination within our Policy Innovation Office at Federal Student Aid. And Ashley and I work together in that office, and one of our jobs that we've been very excited to work with over the last several months has been the prison education programs. And so today, one thing I will say about Ashley that she probably didn't say about herself is that she has played a key role in the implementation of this PEP program. She has been an integral part of it from the inception and has kept us all on track. And so a lot of the information that you'll see coming out of the department is due to her efforts in making sure that we're all on the same page and that we get the best information to our customers. So we thank Ashley for that. Today, really what we're going to do is we're going to spend a good amount of time in this presentation talking about prison education programs. We want you to go away today as a takeaway to understand the prison education programs for confined or incarcerated individuals. We will have some time at the end to answer any questions that you may have, and we're happy to do so. So we're excited to be here, and let's move on to the slide number 2. Let's talk a little bit about the agenda today. What we plan to do is talk about the FAFSA Simplification Act, but in general, we're going to focus our energy and our time today on the topic at hand, which is prison education programs. There's a lot of information that was included in FAFSA simplification, important information. And so we won't be talking about a lot of that today, but there'll be much guidance coming out from the department, and some already has for the implications of the FAFSA Simplification Act. But today we're going to talk about prison education. And we're going to talk about the importance of the prison education programs. We're going to talk about the process of applying for prison education programs, and then talk about really what the requirements are for application. And also, we're going to spend a little bit of time discussing some great resources that the department has put together that we plan to have available to schools as they begin applying for prison education programs if they choose to enter into that field. We're also going to, as part of the prison education program approval process, there is the role of an oversight entity. And this will be a new term that many of you probably haven't heard of before. When you offer prison education, you obviously have to have a prison education program and partner with a correctional facility. And basically the oversight entity would be the entity that would oversee the program at the facility and give the institution permission to offer the program in that setting. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then also we'll spend some time talking about the valuable resources that are available that we put together, and then we'll spend some time, like I said, at the end for any questions that you might have. On this slide number 3, we're going to talk about the FAFSA Simplification Act, like I said, but we're going to spend our time today talking about the changes that were part of that act that now allows confined or incarcerated individuals that were confined in federal or state correctional facilities with access to Pell Grants. Because as you may be aware, back in the 90s, mid-90s, such students were not allowed. The statutory provision was put in place where those students were not allowed. There were prison education programs that are offered in the local jails, which just have to be Title IV eligible programs. But this particular new provision, the statutory provision, has been changed and it's been updated. And so now individuals that are confined in state or federal correctional facilities are eligible for Pell. But there's a key important factor that we want to stress here, and we really want access to be provided to these students. But Congress has tied eligibility to this particular program for confined or incarcerated individuals to their enrollment in what we call an eligible prison education program, which we refer to throughout the regulations as PEP. So you'll hear that a lot. The department does have a lot of maybe fortunately or unfortunately, we sometimes refer to acronyms quite frequently, as you know. And this will be you'll hear PEP a lot, and that's what we call a prison education program. We're also going to define what we mean by an eligible prison education program. And the law clearly defines an eligible prison education program and the aspects that have to be part of that program and the specific requirements that need to be in place throughout the program itself as you begin to develop it, but just as important as you begin to implement it. So that we'll spend a little bit of time talking about those requirements as well. All right. On the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about the PEP, the prison education programs, and we're going to talk specifically about the eligibility of such programs and the process that you would go through to make a determination, at least from your end, and then also from the department's end, of how to apply for a prison education program so that you can hopefully have a program up and running sometime after implementation, which would be July 1, 2023. So what are the requirements of prison education programs? Well, basically, there are several requirements, but some key requirements that you need to be aware of is that a school that's offering a PEP has to be, by regulation, they must be a public, nonprofit, or vocational institution. So for the for-profit schools, the prison education programs would not be allowed as far as Pell eligibility, although such institutions can still partner with facilities and offer prison education just like they would if they were outside of these requirements, but the students wouldn't be eligible for Pell. Because as you're aware, there are some outside entities that provide education in the carceral setting that sometimes can be offered without Pell eligibility, and those programs are not regulated. They can continue. These what we're talking about today are if you want to have a PEP that is Pell eligible, these are the requirements that you would need to have in place from the Title IV eligible program perspective. So schools offering a PEP must be a public, nonprofit, or vocational institution. The other important information is that the program has to be approved to operate by the oversight entity, and we mentioned the oversight entity a little bit earlier, and that's an important aspect of it. The prison education program may only be offered by an institution that has been approved by that correctional facility or by their appropriate state, in which case if it was a state facility, it would be the state correctional facility, or if it's a federal, it would be the federal facility itself. And then after the 2 years of your initial approval, a best interest determination must be made by the oversight entity. And we'll provide information about what we mean by the best interest determination. But in the initial phase of your application, you don't have to worry about providing the best interest, because that's something that would not take place until 2 years after the initial approval of the program. Now, that's not to say that you don't want to have your thought process in place about how you're going to determine that your program and the metrics you're going to use, et cetera. You can work with your oversight entity throughout that process, but the actual requirement from the Title IV perspective doesn't kick in until 2 years after the initial eligibility of the program. An important piece, as you'll probably agree, is that another requirement of the prison education program process is that the program must offer transferability of credits to at least one institution in the state where the correctional facility is located, or in the event if it's a federal facility, in the state where a majority of the students are going to be located once they're released. And that's something that could be determined by the institution in consultation with the oversight entity and correctional facility itself. So that's some important requirements for prison education program on slide number 5. On the next slide, slide number 6, we have some other requirements that are really important to remember as you're developing your prison education program. So there are specific requirements placed on institutions as part of our eligibility requirements for programs themselves. And that is that one of them is that the institutions cannot be subject to any negative actions in the last 5 years by the department, state, or accrediting agency. Also, in conjunction with that, the institution cannot be subject to any initiated adverse action by their accreditor. And that's important too. And then if applicable, because not all programs actually will require professional licensure or certification, but in the event that it does, it has to satisfy the educational requirements for such licensure or certification in the state in which the correctional facility is located. On top of that, the program cannot enroll confined or incarcerated individuals in such a program that is designed to lead to licensure or employment for a specific job or occupation if such job or occupation typically involves prohibitions on the licensure or employment of formerly incarcerated individuals based on federal or state law. So that's an important requirement as well for prison education programs. And then we move on to slide number 7. And now we've talked a little bit about what the general requirements are for prison education programs. We also have specific requirements for accreditation. And the first bullet that we talk about here is really important, is that the regulations do require that the accrediting agency needs to review and evaluate at least the institution's first PEP at the first 2 additional locations. So it wouldn't be, there's not going to be stringent requirements in place for subsequent programs. Most of the requirements that we have in place that are more in-depth have to do with that first program that's offered at the first 2 additional locations. The agency also needs to approve the first additional program offered by a new method of delivery. So that means that, let's say if your first PEP that you have approved at a correctional facility involves, for mode of instruction, maybe in person. Maybe there's an instructor that goes to the facility and instructs those students. If you decide to add a second or a subsequent program by a different mode of instruction, so maybe, for example, you want to, maybe your mode will be distance ed. And if that's the case, then that's what we mean by the accreditation would have to approve that first additional PEP offered by a new method of delivery. And that's just required in addition to that first program that's required for approval at the first 2 locations. The accrediting agency is also required to perform a site visit at the first 2 additional locations within 1 year after the approval. So they don't have to do it right away, but they'll make it part of the procedures to do that within 1 year after the approval of your program. And then one important thing is that on the last bullet there is that the accreditor must also review and approve the methodology for how the institution, when they collaborate with their oversight entity, because it's going to be really important to collaborate with that oversight entity because they're the entity that oversees the correctional facility. So you need to collaborate with that entity to make sure that the determination that the prison education program meets the same standards, substantially similar programs that are not prison education programs. So these programs that they're offering for confined or incarcerated individuals need to be have the same standards in place as other programs that are offered outside of that setting. One thing to note about that last bullet, which I think is important and has caused quite a few questions, is that the department does acknowledge that the accrediting agency will not necessarily have to review or approve the best interest methodology. We talked about the best interest a couple of minutes ago for the first 2 years of the prison education program. And that's because the school would not be able to detail the methodology the oversight entity used in making that initial determination under 668.241A, which is the new part of the regulation where all of the prison education programs confide and reside. And so as a result, the information in this last bullet here will not be required until 2 years after the initial approval of the PEP. So the department is aware that the wording of the regulations caused a little bit of confusion. And so we plan to make a technical correction to the final rule to accurately reflect the timing of this review that's required under 668.237 B4. And again, that's part of the prison education new regulations that you'll see. If you've looked at the new rule, it's out there in that note in the notice. If not, it'll be in the electronic code of federal regulations once it's implemented after July 1. You'll see those regs there. All right, the application requirements. This has caused a lot of confusion in some cases because a lot of schools are wondering. We get a lot of questions. What do we need to do if we want to offer a prison education program? What does the department need from us? And that you have to have that oversight entity. You have to have an agreement with the correctional facility and obviously decide what type of program you want to offer in conjunction with the various entities on your campus that make such decisions. And once you go through that, there is an approval process. So for many of you who have been around in other areas of your eligibility, so perhaps maybe you've gone through recertification, or maybe you've added like a new president, or you've made some updates to the department, you'll be happy to hear that that process for reporting prison education programs is going to be the same process. You're going to use what we call the electronic application, which is referred to kindly as the EAP. And so that information will not change. And so that will be something familiar to you. So when you would log in and you would be able to go into the EAP, and you'd be able to initiate your approval process for a PEP, a prison education program. That being said, there are some additional requirements that are specific to PEPs that need to be included and addressed when you're applying on the EAP. And the first thing is that you're going to need to provide a description of the PEP. So the department wants to know, and the regulations specifically state that we want to know whether the program is a degree or a certificate program. So you need to provide a little bit more information about the description of the program itself and what you plan to offer. As you know, with the EAP process, when you add eligibility updates, there are specific requirements that need to be or documentation that need to be submitted along with that update, and this is no different. One of those is documentation from your accreditor, and that the main one that you're going to need to have from your accreditor at the point of initial application is that the program is approved and is included in the institution's grant of accreditation and approval. The other information you'll need to provide is the name of the correction facility where the PEP will be offered and delivered, and the documentation from that correctional facility, or as we state, the oversight entity, that they've approved the program to be offered within that facility. Another piece of information is a summary of how the oversight entity initially approved the PEP, not in a lot of detail, because you'll provide the detail in the best interest. But during this initial application phase, we just want to know just a short summary of how the institution worked with the oversight entity to have the program approved. And the summary would need to include certain things like the intended methodology, specific thresholds that you plan to use, or benchmark standards, metrics, data, and other information about how the oversight entity plans to collect the information as part of the best interest. So you won't have to have that best interest completed, but you should start thinking about that during this process and provide a summary of what you plan to do. That obviously can change and can be enhanced, but just a summary is all that we're asking at this initial application point. And then we also are going to be asking for a description of the services that will be provided to students. And so if you have specific services, we just will ask in general what type of services you provide to students that are in this setting. And then acknowledgement, just a standard acknowledgement that the department does have the ability to, of course, limit or terminate the PEP's approval in the event that something is not right, or program doesn't meet requirements, etc. So that's just something that's part of the regulations, and it's important for us to note that that is something that could occur. You need to also submit an agreement as part of this initial application that you will, as other programs require as well, that you'll submit annual reports to the department as required. And we will provide, Ashley has been working extremely hard, and we're going to be providing you with information about the reporting requirements, because that's something that's also outlined in the regulations and statute. So we'll provide more information about the specific reporting requirements that will be required on an ongoing basis for any prison education programs that you initiate and get approval for. And then we also, as finally on this particular piece here, the documentation that the institution has an agreement in place with the oversight entity to obtain data transfer and release information. So we want to make sure that you have data about the transfer and release dates of the incarcerated individuals, which is a requirement, part of the reporting requirements that are going to be in place for this particular PEP program process. Okay, so as you can see, one thing I did want to note, you might be asking yourself, that's a lot of information, Michael. I don't know if I can remember all that. Well, I understand that. That's totally fine, and we're going to help you through that. The department is in the process now of developing, we have developed a prison education approval application form. And basically all the information that I just discussed, along with all the certifications, everything that you need to apply for your prison education program, will be included in that form. Guidance, certifications, all the different information that you need to submit, the documentation that needs to be submitted along with your application, that will be in a prison education application that we'll make available to all schools sometime this summer. So you'll be able to use that as you begin applying for your PEP. Important information to be aware of. It's going through the OMB clearance process. So many of you may have seen that that document is out there for you to provide comments. And so that document is right now currently going through OMB approval. But once we gather all the comments and we have the final version that's been approved, we'll get that out to the community so you can start having that helpful document that you'll be able to use as you apply. One really nice thing about it, as if you're familiar with the EAP process, when you conduct or submit an application or some type of update to your eligibility status, specific documentation has to be included. Well, this PEP form is one that you can attach, and that will include, if you use the form appropriately, a lot of the certifications and documentation that is required for PEPs will be included in that form when you complete it. So we're excited that we have that available, and we wanted just to make a note of that look forward to that. You're not alone. If you're interested in PEP, we've got you covered. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the program reporting requirements. This is a kind of an important piece here because, again, as you know, the PEP requirements for that first program at the first 2 locations have some specific information that needs to be included with that application. So it's more detailed. There's more requirements. We're taking a closer look at that first program at the first 2 locations, and I think that's important to understand. At the same time, once you've developed your first PEP at the first 2 locations and you decide maybe you want to expand and offer another program, or you want to work with another facility, you still have to report those programs via the EAP, and you can use the same approval form, but the process itself is much simpler. It's just, we call it a condensed version. It's not an official approval with all the documentation that was required for that first program. But there are certain things that are very similar that are going to be required for all programs, even if you're just reporting. And you can see 3 of them here on the screen. The first one, again, as you remember, we just want to make sure the regulations that the regulations want to make sure, and it's written out in the regs, that there are no negative actions by the accrediting agency or state approval agency against the institution, and their institution is not currently subject to a current initiated adverse action. And again, because this is an important piece of it, the best interest, all that's going to be required for programs. As you add programs, regardless of whether you're just required to report them, the agreement to obtain the transfer and release data from the oversight entity has to be in place for all programs. And so you have to submit that when you are just reporting a program as well. And then there's specific accrediting agency approval documentation that needs to be approved, pretty much submitted with various types of eligibility updates when you're reporting, including this one as well. And so that's basically going to be the documentation that the accrediting agency approval documentation that, the program has been approved by the accreditor, et cetera. Those are the types of information that you'll have to submit when you report. And again, that prison education approval form that we have out that will be available later on this summer will include both the initial information for the first PEP at the first 2 locations, and you'll have some great information, and you'll be able to use that form for that. But you'll also be able to use the form when you're just reporting additional or subsequent programs beyond that first one. And so look forward to that this fall or this summer before the July 1 implementation date. All right, I know that's a lot of information, but I just wanted to make sure that you had kind of a general understanding of how the prison education approval process is going to work. And we're always open to questions, and we'll give you some information at the end. I'd like to turn it over now to my wonderful colleague, Ashley, and she's going to continue on and talk about the oversight, the role of the oversight entity, and continue on to the rest of the presentation. And Ashley, are you going to, do you want me to share and continue? Or
no,
would you like to? You got it?
Yeah, I have it. Yep.
I'll stop sharing then, and you can take it from there.
Okay. Yep. And I will. Let me share this back. But what Michael was talking about, especially with all of the requirements, leads us up really nicely to discussing the role of the oversight entity. And so he mentioned a few things with that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next few minutes really talking about and demystifying really like what the role of the oversight entity is, what are some of the aspects to it, and how it all connects together with prison education programs. So let's begin. Can everyone see my screen? I think Michael, you can see it. Yeah. Okay, great.
That's good.
Awesome. Okay, so the oversight entity plays an important role in the approval process for prison education programs. They're responsible for ensuring that programs meet the needs of the students in their facilities and continually evaluate the programs over time to make sure that the standards are maintained over time. So there's four aspects of the role of the oversight entity. So number one, they must initially authorize a post-secondary institution to operate within the facility. Number two, they must agree with the post-secondary institution in writing that they will provide data on the transfer or release of confined or incarcerated students who received federal Pell Grants to the post-secondary institution. Number three, make a determination as to whether each PEP is being offered in the best interest of students after 2 years of initial approval. Document its process for making the best interest determination and provide the documentation to the institution. The institution must retain this documentation as long as the program is in operation. Okay, so one of the things too is that one of the key things, you may have written this down already, is best interest of students. And so we're going to dive into that and how that relates. Okay, so the oversight entity makes the best interest determination in a couple of ways. Number one, through a feedback process that considers input from relevant stakeholders and in light of the totality of the circumstances. After 2 years of initial approval, the institution must be determined by the oversight entity to be operating in the best interest of students as defined in the regulations. After its initial determination that a program is operating in the best interest of students, the institution must obtain subsequent final evaluations for each eligible prison education program from the responsible oversight entity no less than 120 days prior to the expiration of each of the institution's program participation agreements. The oversight entity may also make a determination between the subsequent evaluations based on the oversight entity's regular monitoring and evaluation of program outcomes. The best interest of students determination will be done in conjunction with the recertification process on a continual basis. One of the themes I want to call out too is that this is really should be looked upon as a partnership, right? You'll be, and we'll, you can ask some questions about that, but this is definitely something that we're looking at as a partnership over time. The institution must obtain and maintain documentation of the methodology by which the oversight entity made each determination. The institution must maintain the documentation for as long as the program is active, or if the program is discontinued, for 3 years following the date of discontinuance. If the oversight entity determines that a program does not operate in the best interest of students, it must allow for the program to reapply within a reasonable time frame. So input from stakeholders, and this goes back to this theme on developing relationships in this partnership piece. Soliciting feedback from the stakeholders is a crucial part of the oversight entity's role. Institutions should work closely with the oversight entity to provide valuable insight into what can be done to improve the program or process. The regulations ensure that the State Departments of Corrections, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, or another entity as appropriate fairly assess institutions' eligibility to offer prison education programs based on the best interests of the students and with the input of affected stakeholders. And to clarify for such prison education programs and ensure transparency and data to demonstrate how well these programs are serving the students. And so on the next slide, we're going to be reviewing some components of what exactly are the components of the student's best interest determination. So the best interest determination must include an assessment of the following. So number one, whether the experience, credentials, and rates of turnover or departure of instructors for a PEP are substantially similar to other programs at the institution. Whether the transferability of credits for courses available to confined or incarcerated individuals and the applicability of such credits toward related degree or certificate programs is substantially similar to those at other similar programs at the institution. Thirdly, whether the institution ensures that all formerly incarcerated students are able to fully transfer their credits and continue their programs at any location of the institution that offers a comparable program, including by the same mode of instruction. Number four, the availability and quality of academic and career advising services, and whether those services are similar to the offerings for a student who is not a confined or incarcerated individual. The best interest determination may optionally include an assessment of the following. Whether the rate of confined or incarcerated individuals, students, continuing their education post-release meets the thresholds established by the oversight entity and input from relevant stakeholders. Whether job placement rates in the relevant field for such individuals meet any applicable standards required by the accrediting agency of the institution or program or a state in the institution that is authorized. Earnings for such individuals, which could include measuring the earnings against a threshold established by the oversight entity, whether the rates of recidivism meets thresholds set by the oversight entity, and also other indicators pertinent to program success as determined by the oversight entity. And as Michael had mentioned, there are a lot more guidance and information that is going to come that is really going to help everyone to be guided through this process, right? You know that there's a lot of information to learn, to digest, and begin to build. And so one of the things, one of the aspects that we are working on, one of the aspects we're working on is the prison education approval form. So prison education application approval form is being worked on right now. It's going through the process and the clearance. And so you'll be seeing some more information about that soon, some notifications on that and when that will be available. We're hoping that it is late spring and right around early summer. Fact sheets related to prison education topics. So there's lots of different communication products that we are producing right now. We are being very intentional and strategic about when we're releasing these items. And also too, we also know that we want these to be very helpful to you all. So we'll be releasing some topics very shortly, as Michael mentioned too, as well, reporting requirements, as well as topics on incarcerated students and for an accreditation, topics on accreditation as well. let's see, some resources. A great way to keep up to date on what's happening with prison education programs is that we have a new topics page for prison education programs at this link right here, fsapartners.gov. And then you can also just type in prison education programs, and then you'll be able to find it. And so on this page currently, you're going to see final regulations for the prison education programs, Dear Colleague letters, electronic announcements, the PDF of the paper FAFSA form for confined or incarcerated students, and links to the Office of Post-Secondary Education Q's and A's. And so we are going to be periodically updating that page so that it's up to date, it's current. We are constantly looking also for new ways to send out information as well. So stay tuned. You might see some other forms of and ways in which we'll announce how you can even get more information from us directly so that you know what's happening in the information and the policy guidance. So we also have a dedicated email inbox for questions on PEP. So if we don't get to your question today, or if we have to take it back just to verify a few aspects of your question, please feel free to email us at pep@ed.gov. And so we'll have our team, one of our team members, and we often are masterminding some of these questions and answers that come in, so that we can be able to get you the right responses to you appropriately. So let me make sure. Okay, we have questions. So now we're here for Q&A. Yes, so I will stop my share here, but so folks can ask questions, but there's much more to come as we are journeying along with you to the road to July 1st. And so we have lots of things in store for you, fact sheets coming along, other forms of communication, so we can be able to get guidance to you quickly as we can, but also making sure that it supports you all in the journey ahead. So, all right. So I think we have Q&A time. And I don't know if folks are going to put something in the chat, or probably, you guys are probably going to ask it. Oh, the session host, I see you've unmuted.
Nope, we're here. Can you hear
us? Okay, great. Yeah. Awesome.
Question. If we're currently enrolled in doing a prisoner education program with a correction facility, do we have to reapply in July 1st? I'm sorry, Ashley, did you hear that question?
I didn't hear the question. I heard something about July 1st.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just asking, like we're currently enrolled, we're currently doing a prisoner education program now. Do we have to reapply?
Oh. Yeah, that's a very good question. And we do realize that there are a lot of schools that currently are offering some type of prison education program in different facilities. And for state and federal correctional facilities, yes, you will have to apply as a PEP. The program itself will have to go through that process. You may not have to make many adjustments to the program, and you may have a head start, but all the requirements that are part of the statute and regulations need to be followed in order to have the program eligible for Pell. For local jails, that's another issue, but local jails will also be, the programs that are offered in local jails will also be subject to these new provisions. However, there's a transition period in the regulations, I think until 2029 for programs in those facilities for students that are currently enrolled in those programs prior to the implementation of the new provisions. So yeah, in a nutshell, you'll have to go through the process, but hopefully you'll have a head start because you already have some experience, and you'll have some information under your belt that you just need to make sure that you submit along with the application. But yes, it will need to have approval in order to have Pell.
For the 23-24.
For the 23-24 award year. Now, there's an exception to that for Second Chance Pell Experiment. As many of you may or may not know, we have a Second Chance Pell Experiment that's been operating since 2015. And those schools that are participating in that experiment will have a transition period as to not interrupt their the education opportunities that they have in place already under the experiment. So those schools will be able to have a transition period to comply with the new provisions for PEP.
And something to add there too, Michael, because we've been talking to institutions about this just with the path towards the new regulations. And so as we have our current second chance Pell participants in the experiment, all roads lead to the regulation. So we just we'll be making sure that that's something that we're articulating and making sure that institutions know that we acknowledge that this whole switch, it's not something that's overnight, that there's a process to it all, but that we are going to be helping everyone per the guidelines to be able to transition smoothly. So that's our goal.
But a very good question. Thank you for that. You will have opportunities to ask us questions anytime, as Ashley said, with the PEP at ed.gov. We do monitor that regularly. So, and if we find a lot of questions are being asked related to a specific topic, we'll make sure that we update our page with the Q&As. So we're trying to be real proactive with you. We know this is an important piece of legislation and new regulations, and we want to work with all of you through the process as your partner to ensure that we can get programs up and running.
All right, we want to thank you guys. Thank you. And thank you guys for joining us today. And
no problem. Very happy.
There is a survey. Don't forget on your CBAN app, there is a survey that you can complete on our sessions today. And you can do that before you survey. Okay, so we're free to go. And you guys, thank you so much for providing the session.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.
Everyone have a great rest of your conference. Enjoy.
Thank you. Have a great one. We'll see you soon.
Take care.
Thanks very much, guys.
Goodbye.
Bye.